Okay, as to the ambiguity of evolutionary notion, we can give some examples, again from my and Jamal Güzel's article. These examples are taken. One, for example, the famous sociologist Tucker Parsons says that whether the adjective biological be used or not, the principle of evolution is firmly established as applying to the world of living things. Such basic concepts of organic evolution or variation, selection, adaptation, differentiation, and integration belong at the center of our concern when appropriately adjusted to a social and cultural subject matter. By the way, this guy, Tucker Parsons, has an evolutionary understanding of different societies. According to him, for example, the more or less United States in the 50s, we are talking about. The United States represents the highest stage of evolution as compared to other parts of the world. So this creates a kind of Eurocentric position in the social theory. You know, the United States or West in general, or Europe, represents the highest stage. Other parts of the world, such as Turkey or other countries, represents a lower stage. So there's a certain fixed path of evolution for all, which is valid for all societies. Sooner or later, we will move to a different stage, etc., etc. This is also a kind of, again, Eurocentrist or almost even racist kind of understanding. Usually, the idea that social Darwinism, which is associated not with Darwin, but with Herbert Spencer, as I said before, represents such a position. Actually, it's more or less a kind of racist position. You know, survival of the fittest. It's also a kind of apologetic understanding of capitalism, etc., etc. So another quote here from a guy named Stewart: evolution can be considered as an interest in determining recurrent forms, processes, and functions. Recurrent forms, processes, and functions. Is this evolution? Well, cultural evolution may be regarded as either a special type of historical reconstruction or a particular methodology or approach, etc., etc. Evolution, according to Huxley, both natural and social, is a self-maintaining, self-transforming, and self-transcending process, directional in time and therefore irreversible, which in its course generates ever fresh novelty, greater variety, more complex organization, higher levels of awareness, and increasingly conscious mental activity. This is particularly interesting, right? Increasingly conscious mental activity with biological evolution and social. Well, anyway, so I think it is sufficient to give these kinds of examples, which we can say that actually the notions or conceptions of evolution used in the social theory are usually at the level of metaphors, not simply causal mechanism, but people keep thinking that they can also cover some kind of functional, mostly functional explanations of the social theory along the lines of evolutionary theory. And also even in Marx, for example, as I said before, we can see a kind of what I'm looking for is, oh, yes, this one, evolution. I think, yes. You know, last time we talked about Marx. Here, Marx has a theory for social change. And in this theory of historical materialism, well, whether it's a theory or not is also ambiguous, but still for the moment, we can accept that it's a kind of a theory, social theory, that is explaining change. Also, in the preface to the contribution to a critical political economy book. He advances some three theses, and the third one isn't interesting for our purposes, which says at a certain stage of development, the material productive forces of society come into conflict with the existing relations of production, with the property relations, etc. From forms of development of the productive forces, these relations turn into their patterns. Then begins an era of social revolution. This is a kind of explanatory mechanism, some people may want to think, but it can be understood as a kind of metaphor, or at best, it's a kind of a philosophical approach which is based upon the idea of becoming, as in the Hegelian theory of dialectics, for example. Well, what I'm saying is that we cannot see every kind of social change as a kind of evolution, as in the science of biology, basically, or as in the science of biological evolutionary theory. That's what I'm trying to say. The second problem associated with the use of evolutionary notions in an uncritical way is that in economics or in other social sciences, evolution is generally used compliant with the Panglossian principle, which is based upon the optimization principle, rationality, costs and benefits and so forth. It's very attractive, of course, for the economists, but still it cannot explain what's going on in the social theory or society along the lines of evolution, biological evolutions. Such uses that corresponds rather to the functionalist approach diminishes the benefits of social science because this leads to an instrumentalist point of view that argues that every social formation, relationship, or institution are exactly as they should be. This is also a kind of teleological approach. As in Tucker Parsons' approach, for example, the United States represents the highest level of evolutionary process, and every society must move towards these kinds of things, this stage of evolution or change, development, whatever you say. So today represents the most complicated, the most complex, the best, the most developed form of the organism or the society or human being or whatever. So as if there's a telos, there's an objective of the history or the evolutionary process, which is to create human beings, for example, in the biological evolution. Human beings is the latest, most recent product, so to speak, of evolutionary process, and it is the most complicated, it's the most perfect form of organism, etc., which is not correct, of course, which is actually wrong. So functionalism, the idea that you can explain the existence of any kind of trait or social relation in terms of the functions it fulfills, is wrong in social theory. It is also wrong in evolution, as Levontin and Stephen Jay Gould forcefully argued. And the third problem associated with the notion of evolution is the uncritical application of the evolutionary notions to social theory overlooks the transforming power of the human agent, thus making individuals as puppets of the societies or the processes which goes at the back of individuals in general. So there is some autonomous processes in the evolutionary process or societies, and individuals are not aware of that, but according to our understanding of society that is based upon the notion of transformative model of society, right, of Bhaskars and Anthony Giddens's, this is wrong. Individuals actively participate into the reproduction of social structures and social relations in general. So individual action is based upon some conscious action. It is intentional in the first place. So this idea of intentionality and also the notions of the categories of morality and ethics cannot apply into the biological world. You cannot say, for example, evolutionary process is a kind of conscious process going on, or it was designed by some force, and it moves according to the principles developed by these meta agency or higher kind of agency. In Richard Dawkins' book, The Blind Watchmaker, a similar idea is used actually. Evolutionary process is like is a process that is based upon the moment according to some design, even if there's no such design. So in order to use the functionalist explanations, you have to argue that there must be some identifiable functions of the societies or social relations which are useful to explain the social processes. But that, at least I believe that this is not the case. But interestingly, as to the economic evolutionary ideas in economics, Schumpeter was the main source for the recent or modern theories of evolution. Of course, the evolutionary thinking starts with Thorstein Veblen, as I said, in the 19th century, but modern evolutionary economics is based upon usually the notions or the approach, the ideas of Schumpeter's. This is quite interesting. As I said before, again, Schumpeter never used the term evolution as when he characterizes his theory, but instead he uses the notion of development. Development as the same with evolution. Well, actually, some people say that there's a close relationship or resemblance between these two notions. Development is a kind of evolution, but it is Schumpeter's choice, that preference, that he prefers the term development. And his understanding of development is quite interesting. He argues in 1932 that there is no difference between novelty in the economy and elsewhere. You guys must know that Schumpeter's evolutionary economic thought is based upon the notion of innovation, right? Innovation is a kind of novelty, basically. He then goes to argue that development should be understood as transition from one norm of the economic system to another norm in such a way that this transition cannot be decomposed into infinitesimal steps. What does this mean? Simple. In economics, we use this infinitesimal reasoning, right? In the idea of marginal utility, marginal productivity, any kind of marginal is nothing but, mathematically speaking, the notion of derivatives, right? The idea of derivatives and also the limit, etc., is based upon the conception of nature that is based upon these small changes, infinitesimal changes. In other words, nature does not make leaps. Every change that occurs, to be sure, some changes in the nature, in the world in general, but these changes are small and infinitesimal, step by step, basically. But Schumpeter argues that this is the essence of his argument, actually. The notion of novelty or innovation in economics is based upon the understanding there's a sharp difference between the period before the innovation and after the innovation. These two periods are completely different from each other. You cannot reduce the post-innovation period into the pre-innovation period, in the sense that this change occurs in an abrupt way, in the form of a revolution, so to speak, however small, basically. So in other words, this notion of development implies that the idea of adaptation, it does not apply in cases of changes in the norms themselves. When starting from the old form, the new one must not be reachable by adaptation in small steps. This is the idea of mutation, and mutations constantly occur, and they occur in an abrupt, in a revolutionary way, so to speak. As to his example of evolution, he uses this painting by a early Renaissance painter named Andrea Mantegna. And this is very interesting. He argues that in the same article, by the way. And this is a kind of novelty. This is a kind of innovation made by the painter here. If you see the picture, actually, you can see that there's a distortion of the body. This is the name of this painting is, by the way, the Dead Christ. He was taken from the cross and lying down as Dead Christ. And you can see that, for example, the feet of Christ are smaller than they should be, actually. And this is a kind of preference of the painter. It's a conscious choice because he wanted for us, for example, to concentrate on the body itself, on the torso, so to speak. So this is important because when anyone sees this picture, he or she would be impressed by the magnificence of the body or the picture in general. So according to him, this is an innovation, and he believes that there's no difference between innovations in economics or in any part of nature or in any case. So novelty is also a novelty. In terms of the evolutionary conception, we can say that these are mutations, and of course in economics, conscious mutations. These are basically. I'm sorry, what did I do? You see this, right, by the way? Okay. So basically, the most important aspect of this evolution is that these changes, mutations, occur in an abrupt way, and it defies a kind of Newtonian change, which is occurring with small steps, infinitesimal changes, etc. That's why derivative is a useful notion for the Newtonian physics and also for economics. Economics is modeled upon Newtonian physics in its first phase, basically. In Schumpeter's understanding of evolution is similar to that of, I'm sorry, again, Gould and Aldrich, and two guys who coined the term punctuated equilibrium. This is a very interesting biological evolution conception. And according to this approach, Darwin's evolutionary theory of evolution has its basic leg due to the fact that change involves a gradual nature. Change of species is not always due to the accumulation of small quantitative characteristics. The quantitative changes may lead to qualitative leaps, or new species may occur suddenly, abruptly, in a revolutionary way. This situation represents possible leaps in evolution, and it also represents sudden possible interruptions while the process continues. It's a blend of continuity and revolutionary changes, so to speak. There's a graphical representation of this process. We are talking about two different periods before the innovation or mutation or the abrupt change, and this is the after. So here, sometimes within the evolutionary process, there will be these kind of revolutionary changes, abrupt changes, which distorts the gradual progress of the process in general, evolutionary process in general. There are also some changes and even bifurcations, such as like this. So we start from here, for example, and then there will be some points of choice, so to speak, and the system chooses one of them randomly, by the way. So there will be a new path. The idea of path dependence is also similar to this kind of understanding. Once you enter into some kind of path, there is no way of returning. So you have to move forward. Evolutionary, so this is also similar to the idea of the arrow of time, right? Time moves in one way. You cannot reverse the time. This process, this whole evolutionary process, is not reversible, as in the Newtonian physics, for example. It's irreversible, and also it creates some kind of complexities. The complexity theory is also useful in this kind of understanding, even in physics these days. And we can talk about these kind of complexity theories, importance of complexity theories. Usually, it's another classification for the evolutionary conceptions. We can say that there are two types of evolutionary processes or mechanisms. One is the mechanical or Darwinian. These are based upon Foster and Schumpeter's arguments. And one is the mechanical or Darwinian, the other is Schumpeterian. You know, Schumpeterian evolution is not necessarily Darwinian, but according to the Lewontin and other biologists, this is not the case also. His ideas, we can say at least similar to that of punctuated equilibrium in general. So one is change, causal and quantitative, functional, linear, reversible, many to one mapping. It's gradual, natural, non facit saltum, etc. And equilibrium is usually understood as Newtonian in the sense of balance of forces. We can also talk about disequilibrium here rather than non-equilibrium. And order is basically spontaneous, which is more or less based upon the idea of optimization. You know, invisible hand thinking, basically. And the evolutionary process can be seen as a kind of natural selection. You know, this parenthesis, in parentheses, we have this statement, uncovering tacit knowledge. This is the idea of Hayek's, you know, last time we talked about. Hayek also sees the working of the market system as a kind of uncovering tacit information or tacit knowledge at the hands of individuals. So the market mechanism collects, processes, and disseminates these kinds of information, and these information will be reflected in the prices, etc. The other idea is definite, determined, and efficient outcomes, which is nothing but the invisible hand thinking. On the other hand, in the Schumpeterian understanding of development, we can say that development is based upon the notion of novelty, some changes that occur in an abrupt fashion. It's adaptive, non-linear, irreversible. There will be some bifurcations, you know, the punctuated equilibrium thing. It's also thermodynamic in the sense of absence of structural change. Well, this is something like this. You know, in the case of this punctuated equilibrium, this first period is more or less inertial. You know, there are changes, but they occur in a gradual and infinitesimal way. And until this abrupt change occurs, for some reason, it could occur in a random fashion, usually it does. And after this change, again, a new period of equilibrium or the period of inertia may occur. Again, there are some small differences, small changes, gradual changes, etc. In that sense, we can say that the absence of structural change is the definition of equilibrium in this understanding, so to speak. You know, because when there's a new structure emerges, then we can no longer talk about these gradual or small changes which do not change the very structure of the organism or the process or the relation, whatever. And also, order is a kind of self-organized, but it's unstable and dissipative. These dissipative structures, this term was coined by this one of the originators of the chaos theory. Again, as usual, I forgot his name, but he's very famous, and he also wrote a book with a philosopher, Order Out of Chaos, and it's a very interesting book. There must be a Turkish translation of it. I would recommend you to read it at the same time. Still don't remember the guy, but he's very important. He also got Nobel Prize for his work, I guess. Anyway, there are some structures, but they are not stable. They can dissipate. And routines will be business as usual. And also, evolutionary process is based upon random mutations, the Schumpeterian notion of innovation. And they are emergent, indeterminate, and unknown outcomes. This term, evolutionary hand, was coined by 4 guys. One of them is Giovanni Dossi. They got a famous book, which was again translated into Turkish, I guess, if I remember correctly. And the difference between invisible hand and the evolutionary hand is that first, this order emerging out of these changes, evolutionary process, is not efficient. It will not create some efficient outcomes. Remember, in the invisible hand thinking of the liberal thought in general, invisible hand always work in the most efficient way, create the best solutions, etc., etc. Remember Pareto efficient outcomes. But in this understanding of evolutionary hand, there will be an order, a new order or a new structure that emerges from the old, but it's not efficient, and also it may not be stable. It is also subject to change, even subject to abrupt changes again. So it's self-organized, but it's also unstable and dissipative. I guess it's enough for today, right? We can go on next week.